Hello and welcome to our Be Human Rights Confident for Lawyers series. I am so thrilled to be joined today by Alasdair Cameron, who is a climate change policy advisor at the Law Society of England and Wales. Welcome, Alasdair.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you. The Law Society is the professional association for solicitors of England and Wales. I was part of it until I handed in my practicing certificate to be advising on soft law, but I'm just so thrilled, Alasdair, that you could join us today. We're talking about two topics which are essential to the future of business: the role of the lawyer and the climate crisis. So, Alasdair, you spearheaded with your climate change working group the first ever guidance for lawyers and law firms on climate change, the impact of climate change on solicitors. And can you just tell us why?
Our guidance was really formed as for part of the profession. There was a real call for it from a lot of members, both from your high street practitioner to the large law firms. And the reason is because as climate change is becoming more profound, it's creating risks for lawyers, both from a competence issue and also from a compliance issue.
Right.
And therefore having guidance from the professional membership body as to how to navigate these regulatory risks that not only are posed to their clients, but to them themselves and their law firms is absolutely essential.
Right. It's evolved really, hasn't it, from this nice to have, I might want to be thinking about this, to really, what do we do about it? Because it's here, we have to be thinking about this.
Absolutely. And it's become more at the forefront, not only because we've got new regulations and legislation relating to climate change, and there's of course going to be more of that to come as we transition to net zero in England and Wales, and of course across the globe.
Yeah.
But as well, solicitors and law firms are making more public statements around climate change, around what they're doing with regards to the transition towards net zero. So it's really important that law firms understand that this is an issue which has a degree of complexity to it, which is not just sits at, I've got recyclable cups at my law firm.
Right.
It's very much, what's the level of advice you're giving to your client? How are you incorporating those risks? Whether you're a property practitioner, a commercial practitioner, or working on international arbitration, climate change sits at the forefront of a lot of these issues in ways that perhaps practitioners have not thought about before. And our purpose of our guidance is to get solicitors thinking about climate change in the context of their professional duties and competency issues where they perhaps have never thought about that before.
Isn't that fascinating? You have all of these solicitors in all of these different practice areas that are impacted by this in different ways. And then you have the solicitors themselves, and then the law firms within which they are operating. And then of course you have in-house lawyers as well. Tell us more about where you landed when it comes to solicitors, and how do you think climate change is impacting the role of a solicitor?
Yeah, no, it's a really good question. I think the first thing that solicitors need to think about is their literacy around this issue. And that's about not understanding, an IPCC report or the Paris Agreement per se. It's about understanding how climate risks are arising in their practice area. So for example, if you're a conveyancing solicitor working on a high street practice law firm, you might be working on conveyancing transactions. Well, how does that impact in regard to what searches are available in the market? How is climate change going to impact the property? How is that going to affect lending capabilities? How is that going to affect insurance? How is that then going to interact with you acting in the best interests of your clients? How's it going to affect housing prices? So that's at the kind of small scale, but then also you've got the kind of much bigger scale. Let's say, for example, you're a commercial lawyer advising on a supply chain contract, and aspects of that contract might be frustrated by the fact that climate change may disrupt, availability or supply chains, or perhaps one of the warehouses is going to be prone to flood risk, and you've been handed that report. How do you then modify the contract to best incorporate those risks or flag those risks to the client in a way they might not have thought about before in terms of the law itself, the actual contract, the nuts and bolts of the issue. So I'd say that's one key area that solicitors need to think about first. How do I spot these risks?
Yeah.
The next part is about thinking, well, how does that interact with my duties with regards to duty to warn, duty to disclose, duty of care, all of these key issues, because the role of a solicitor is to spot the risks which a client or a layman would not be aware of. And frankly, the solicitor, therefore, at the end of the day, climate change, so much of climate change is going to impact the practice of law and also the changing policy landscape. So a client might not be aware of new disclosure obligations, for example, or a board might not be thinking about, for example, their fiduciary duties in the context of their corporate strategy or whatever it might be. So that's the next part of it. And then the latter part of it is about thinking about the role of a solicitor as that kind of trusted profession within society, where people go to a solicitor expecting this level of trust, this level of objectivity,
right.
to act within their best interests. And then that interacts with what we have as the SRA's principles, which is for England and Wales solicitors, which we look at integrity and public trust in
right.
the context of climate change and thinking about those key questions. And that also interacts with that difficult question with regards to should I or should not I advise certain
right.
clients. Now, of course, the Law Society wouldn't say you shouldn't represent certain clients.
Right.
However, we do establish from a regulatory point of view, you can decline to act. And that's a really important one, particularly for junior lawyers who are thinking about this question more. And in turn, law firms need to be thinking about this question more as well.
You have such an interesting, you really talk in your guidance about this philosophical belief of climate change that's now protected. And so therefore we, as a law firm, we're not only looking at this because we have our own commitments towards climate, or we're trying to advise our companies that have their own commitments, but also for retention of talent, and that this is the
Absolutely.
future of a law firm today. Yeah, what you're really highlighting here is the way in which the whole world is evolving because of climate change, and therefore the solicitor in it that is advising on all these different pieces, of course, needs to have that vision. And I remember when I was an M&A lawyer that we, of course, weren't going to be, I'm not a tax expert, but I needed to know enough that I knew I need to get tax involved. And
that's a perfect example. Solicitors can go, climate risk, gosh, that's a big technical scientific issue, I don't understand that, deal with that. And you go, no,
right.
exactly to that point, tax is a great one. Not a specialist in it, but you
right.
need to understand where those implications arise.
Right, it's such a big deal. It will cost so much money that I have not done my job as a solicitor if I haven't raised it, even if I'm not going to be that tax specialist.
Mm-hmm.
So you've touched upon the role of the solicitor in this changing world, and then you started to talk about the law firm's role and
mm-hmm.
taking on clients or not. Can you share a little bit more some of the other considerations you might have landed on?
So I think that with, as I was saying before, a lot of law firms having made, these kind of a lot of these public commitments, which are obviously fantastic, and we encourage at the Law Society to achieve net zero or carbon reductions, or perhaps be more sustainable. Just like any organisation in England and Wales, we're looking for a very robust market around any statements made and green claims. Therefore, it's really important that there is a regulatory, that solicitors and law firms understand the regulatory risk as well around any statements made. So it's really for law firms now to look at any statements they made or perhaps are going to make to clients or the public and really scrutinize them.
Right.
In the same way that they would advise their clients to scrutinize statements. It's about turning it back.
Yes.
And it's as well for law firms to recognize that this is a massive opportunity to them in terms of gaining talent, positioning the legal sector and lawyers in England and Wales as leaders in providing advice on climate risks.
Right.
And lawyers sit at a really interesting intersection where the climate crisis is a giant issue, but solicitors are everywhere, everything all at once. They are doing everything, right? They can actually pivot a lot of decision making in a really impactful and powerful way. So 100%. I think that lawyers, for that reason, and law firms can really, a bit like the financial sector and kind of pivoting itself towards pushing the private sector transition towards net zero, law firms can, in England and Wales, be part of that transition too.
So well put, Alasdair. I remember John Ruggie always saying this, behind everything, every transaction, there is a lawyer. And that's why he was so intent on including lawyers, including myself, as part of the UNGP's development in the process, because lawyers are everywhere. And essentially, one of the things I think is really striking about your guidance is shifting the focus from, as you're saying, the recycled cups to, well, if I'm advising on this coal mine, that we are continuing, what role will I play to actually start to build my leverage as a wise advisor, as a wise counsellor? Say, well, yeah, you could be doing this, but hang on, you've got these other laws going on. This is what's going on. We're not saying it's a nice thing to do. It's actually a real business risk for the company that you're advising.
Exactly, and to that end, law firms are already having to make those difficult decisions around, right? Okay, well, we can advise on this because it is legal, but at the same time, does the reputational risk, and also in the context of the statements we've made, how does that sit?
Right.
What sort of advice should we be providing to them, or indeed whether we should be? And that's a really difficult one, and I think that's an important part of this guidance as well, to signify to lawyers and law firms to say, you know, confronting these difficult questions is important as an organization, but you're going to get it bottom up as well.
Right.
You're going to get it from the younger lawyers who are concerned about this. And, you know, it's better to think about, okay, have we got the structures in place to accommodate a request if a lawyer says to us, you know, I feel like I'm going to be comprising my potential beliefs or my integrity by acting on this issue. It's better to have a position ahead of time on that. So we're encouraging law firms to think about it in that regard as well, both in terms of organization and also the people that they're employing.
Alasdair, with Marlon, we initiated, just without, not on purpose, with these top tips. So top tips for solicitors watching today.
Well, first and foremost, I would say read our guidance. Definitely read our guidance, because it impacts and is relevant to all lawyers in England and Wales. I would also encourage international law firms and lawyers to read our guidance as well. Although it's relevant for England and Wales, we're working with other jurisdictions to produce very similar guidance to ours, and we're hoping that this is going to be a kind of global shift on the basis that the climate crisis is a global problem. The second, this is a bit more for England and Wales lawyers, is look out there as to all the initiatives which exist. They're a fantastic realm of support organizations where you can get education, you can find, you know, similar-minded lawyers to network with on these issues. So a good example, Lawyers for Net Zero is specifically for in-house counsel. You've got the Net Zero Lawyers Alliance, which has a number of the largest law firms in the world signed up to it. You have the Legal Sustainability Alliance as well, working to that end with a lot of law firms. And of course the Chancery Lane Project, which provides contracts clauses for which are aligned with the 1.5 degree Paris Agreement goal. So I think there's a lot of resource out there. It's about taking the initiative, looking what's out there, and before this issue becomes one that, you know, your clients are saying, why have you not thought about this before? Because clients are beginning to ask that question already. So you can position yourself ahead of all of that.
Way better to be ahead of the curve, and soon it won't be ahead, it'll just be the curve. You're on the curve and very soon behind the curve. Thank you so much, Alasdair, for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you, and for all your work.
Thank you.
Thanks for watching. See you next time.